In the last time on Movies and Lore, we discussed the creation of the Rings of Power, how Sauron used the knowledge he obtained under Olli to eventually create the One Ring. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. Having not been able to complete his deception on the elven ring-bearers, he declared himself openly and demanded that all the rings of power be given onto him. Some say this is actually when the War of the Ring began, where Sauron destroyed Eregion and devastated most of Eriador. Sauron prevailed for the most part and obtained all the rings of power, save the 3 most powerful ones. He then gave 9 rings of power to men and the other 7 to the dwarf lords. After this time, Sauron held great dominion over Middle-earth and was known by many as the Dark Lord of Mordor. During this time, he constructed Barad-dûr and the Black Gate to deter invasions into Mordor itself. He rallied all manner of fell creatures, including orcs, trolls, and even rallied men to his cause. The One Ring, much like the 3 great rings, had the ability to enhance its bearer's native abilities. And so, while Sauron held the One Ring, his power was enhanced and greater than prior to making the ring. Using the One Ring, Sauron bound Barad-dûr itself to the One Ring. While the ring survived, not only he too would, but also anything he made while in possession of the One. However, if that ring were to be destroyed, anything that was made by it would be destroyed along with the majority of his power. The 9 rings of men granted them many boons, extending the lives to an unnatural length and enhancing their hold of their realms, and even granting them victories in battle where they would not. However, they all eventually succumbed to the corruption of the One and the domination of Sauron. Each were turned into darkness, invisible to all those except the master of the One Ring. They were eventually called the Nazgul. Despite the great power he obtained, aside from the elves which he hated, he feared the men of Numenor. They had grown mighty. They had amassed the most powerful army in the known world, when Sauron declared himself king of the earth. Sauron was using this as a ploy, for he had learned much of the kingdom of Numenor and realized that he could not content openly with their power directly. And as he wanted, the king of Numenor challenged him. And a great fleet from Numenor arrived at the shores of Middle-earth. Sauron's forces fled in fear, and Sauron decided to give in to his cunning and allow himself to become a prisoner. In Numenor, he went from a captive to the chief advisor to the king himself, and slowly began corrupting Numenor from within the king's court. His corruption filled the mind of their king Ar-Pharazôn, and as he grew older, he feared death, and Sauron used this to his advantage. He lied to the king, saying that Melkor is the true master of the Void, and that the Valar betrayed him, and that one day he would return, and even grant the king of Numenor other lands and even entire worlds to conquer. But the Valar had kept the secret to immortality in Valinor, so he enticed the king to assemble possibly the greatest armada Arda has ever seen. So the great armada of Numenor sailed to Valinor, and upon reaching the shores, Manwë, king of the Valar, prayed to Eru, and he rained down great devastation upon the fleet, the armies of Numenor and Numenor itself. And so Valinor was sundered from the physical world, such that no mortal could simply sail to Valinor, and only the Eldar and the Chosen could still sail into Valinor, for Eru determined to never allow mortals to assault it again. Numenor itself was destroyed and taken under by vast waves and earthquakes and storms. Sauron was caught in the destruction, and his spirit fled along with the One Ring back to Mordor. From this time on, he could no longer take his fair form again. However, not all the Númenóreans were victims of the destruction. The faithful, led by Elendil and Isildur, landed in the shores of Middle-earth and formed the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor. The White City of Minas Tirith was formed, and other major cities and strongholds created by the exiles of Numenor. And while Sauron was away, Gil-galad restored much of the Elven Kingdom, and now, from Sauron's viewpoint, his enemies had multiplied, and his hold on Middle-earth was vastly weakened. The reserves of his strength were depleted, and it was noted that it required a vast amount of power to corrupt Numenor, coupled by the power required to create a new physical form to inhabit. With the might of Numenor all but extinguished, the forces of Sauron launched a new assault on the elves and men, and so Gil-galad. Elrond led the elves along with Elendil and Isildur, leading the exiles of Numenor. They amassed a large combined army, the last alliance of elves and men. They pushed Sauron's forces to the slopes of Mount Doom. Elrond described the moment when Sauron himself walked into battle, and he said,
I beheld the last combat on the slopes of Orodruin, where Gil-galad died, and Elendil fell, and Narsil broke beneath him. But Sauron himself was overthrown, and Isildur cut the ring from his hand with the hilt shard of his father's sword, and took it for his own.
And this finally ended his reign, for a time. Sauron's spirit fled, but he was not forever due to the One Ring surviving. And again, while the ring survived, so did Sauron. Isildur took the ring and carried it with him for a time, until he was ambushed by a patrol of orcs and killed. The ring felt out of sight and memory. During this time, Sauron was regaining his strength and assumed the identity of the necromancer of Dol Guldur. During this time, he was still greatly weakened, but continued to plan for his return. Eventually, the White Council, comprised of Galadriel, Saruman, Gandalf, and Elrond, drove him out of that fell place, and his spirit went back to Mordor, a time where Gondor was waning due to the line of kings being broken, and the stewards were in power. The ring was eventually found by Smeagol and ultimately taken by Bilbo in that fateful cave during the events of The Hobbit. For many years he held it in the Shire, and none of the powers were aware of its location, nor that it had been found. Ultimately, during the events of The Lord of the Rings, the ring was entrusted to Frodo, which was determined that the only course in the Council of Elrond, that it had to be destroyed in the same place where it was created. Only the fires of Mount Doom could the ring be unmade. And through many journeys, Frodo and Sam reached Mount Doom, but Frodo ultimately succumbed to the corrupting influence of the ring, inadvertently taking it for himself but stopped by Gollum. In the struggle, he fell into the fires of Mount Doom, ultimately destroying the One Ring. Sauron's power was destroyed. His armies were no more. The Black Gates and Barad-dûr itself were laid waste. And all the works that Sauron labored on fell to ruin. Due to the link between the Great Rings and the One, they too lost their power. And so, with the destruction of the One Ring, he remains forever a shadow, unable to take form or affect the events of Middle-earth again. If you like what you have seen here, please leave us a like. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do. This will help our channel grow and deliver more content. Until next time, friends.